Okay, thank you everyone for coming to this talk entitled Remembering the Kindness of the Deceased. Okay, so this talk is in conjunction with the Qingming Festival, which is coming up soon. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the origins of Qingming, and also to give you three Buddhist methods in which we can remember the kindness of the deceased and what we can do for them. Okay? First things first. How many of you here have a tradition of celebrating Qingming? Okay. And out of you, how many know the origins of Qingming? Nobody? Anybody know the reason behind Qingming? That's me. Okay, remembrance of the ancestors. Okay, Qingming is obviously a Chinese celebration, but it encompasses something that crosses over all cultures, across all societies, which is remembering the deceased and remembering their kindness. Okay, so Qingming in the Chinese tradition, you usually go to the gravesite or the columbarium. You clean the columbarium or the gravesite, and you would leave offerings for them. Okay? The way that Qingming is celebrated now has actually changed a lot over the millennia. Okay? So the origin story of Qingming was that during the Jin dynasty, there was a prince named Chong'er. Excuse my pronunciation. Now, during this particular dynasty, the previous emperor had a lot of sons, a lot of princes, with various concubines. There was one particular concubine who was adamant that her son would become emperor. So she began to murder the other princes. She started murdering the other concubines one by one, and then their sons, so that her son could become emperor. So there was a prince by the name of Chong'er who was second in line for the throne. But the prince that was first in line for the throne was killed by the concubine. Realizing that he was in deep trouble and he would have been murdered, he escaped the kingdom. And he took with him a minister from the court named Jie. And basically, they wandered in the forests outside of the kingdom. They didn't have much to eat. They were sleeping rough on the forest floor. They were eating whatever they could come by. But this minister was very loyal to Chong'er, to the extent that one day they didn't have any food at all. He actually cut a piece of flesh from his thigh to cook, to make sure that the prince had enough to eat. So this went on for about 3 or 4 years. And up until that time, the concubine murdered all the rest of the princes in the kingdom. But eventually she succumbed to death herself. When that happened, the court sent out riders into the forests to find Chong'er. So they found him. And he was in an extremely deplorable condition. So what they did was they invited him back to the kingdom to take the throne as the emperor. As they were getting onto the carriage in the forest to drive back to the kingdom, the prince saw an army official who was saddling his horse. And when he was saddling his horse, he had a very old blanket that he put over the horse. He immediately said, "What is the use of having such an old blanket?" Now, the minister Jie thought there was something really wrong with this, because they just spent the last 3 to 4 years in deplorable conditions, having nothing to eat, having no clothes apart from what they wore in the back. And as soon as the prince was told that he was going to regain the princely life, he automatically forgot about being humble. He automatically forgot about the deplorable conditions that they were living in. he automatically forgot how it is like to be poor. So at that point, the minister Jie decided that he wouldn't return back to the kingdom with the prince. So the prince, being overcome with desire for the princely life, returned back to the kingdom and became the emperor and lived in luxury. So the minister Jie was very distraught at this. So he went back to the kingdom by himself. He found his mother, and he took his mother to live in the forest. So they lived a very humble life, even though he was a minister in the court. So he could have had all the luxury he had wanted. But he instead chose to live an extremely humble life in the middle of the forest. So over the years, the prince, enthralled with his life of luxury, forgot all about Jie. Until one day finally arrived when he was reminded that he had this minister that was so loyal to him. So what he did is he decided to find the minister Jie and his mother and invite them back to live in the court. So he sent out messengers who managed to find them wandering in the forest, but Jie refused to come back. He said the king was overcome with desire for the royal life, for luxury. So they decided they wouldn't go back, but continue living in the forest. When the then emperor heard about it, he basically said in a fit of rage, "Burn down the forest. Burn down the forest, and that way the minister Jie will have no choice but to come back and live with me in the court." So he sent his entire army to burn down the forest. But sadly, the minister Jie and his mother died in the forest fire. They didn't escape, but they were burned to death. After that, the king was extremely remorseful, and he thought to himself, "What have I done?" So in honor of the minister and his mother, he started a celebration which was then known as the Cold Food Celebration, which was a 3-day celebration to remember the minister, where everybody would eat cold food, nothing hot. You wouldn't use a fire for anything for those 3 days. So that is actually the origin story of Qingming. Okay? Over the years, what had happened is it's changed into what we know now. And the Chinese have a very long history of worshipping the ancestors for prosperity, for health, and giving them a lot of offerings. Later on, what happened is there was another emperor who said that the court was spending way too much money on making offerings to the deceased. And it had become an extremely extravagant affair. It was extremely extravagant. So the emperor decided that you could only make offerings to the ancestors on one specific day. And he chose the Cold Food Festival. So that is why within the Chinese tradition, the tradition is always to make the offerings to the deceased on Qingming. Okay, so like Datongmei said, there's a tradition of going to the gravesites, cleaning the gravesites in remembrance of the people, of our loved ones who have passed away, and also leaving a lot of offerings for them. Now, this is something that is very intrinsic to the Chinese tradition, and it comes from the Taoist tradition. In Taoism, what they say is, the belief is that when a person dies, they go to a sort of afterlife and underworld. So you have the world of the living, and then you have the world of the dead. Okay? So the world of the living is classified as the world of light, and the world of the dead is classified as the world of darkness. The underworld is a tough place to be in. Why? Because in Taoism, it says that the ancestors that are there cannot actually eat. They can't eat anything. So in Taoism, what they believe is that when you burn joss sticks, they can partake of the smoke. So that is why in Taoism and in the Chinese tradition, there is always a lot of incense burning. So that's why when you go to the gravesites, most probably you'd burn joss sticks and also leave hell money. So, or burn hell money for the deceased. Now, it is said that even though they can't eat in the underworld, they still need to pay their way to get through life, to get through death in the underworld, which is the reason why in the Chinese tradition that they burn hell money and they burn all sorts of effigies. These days it's cars and houses and servants, iPhones, all sorts of things that a normal person would want, but just in the underworld. Okay? Another tradition that I've heard a lot of people talk about is food. Now, when I've been talking to people, there are 3 specific foods that are mentioned a lot. From a Buddhist perspective, since we're vegetarian, it is not encouraged. But within traditional Chinese tradition, there are 3 foods. One is a cooked pork, a cooked pig, a chicken, and tangerines. I have heard people say that they offer tangerines. And there's a specific reason for this, but this isn't actually, if you look culturally, it isn't actually to do with the deceased. It's actually to do with the living. The pig represents hard work and farming. Because when farmers work in the field, they're under the hot sun all day, their backs go red. So when you roast an entire pig, it turns red. So it's actually the color and the symbolism that signifies hard work. Okay? And again, with the chicken, it actually represents a phoenix or a dragon during the Qingming festival when it's cooked and offered. And obviously tangerine, I think we all know in Chinese the word tangerine sounds like good luck, I think, right? Money, gold. Yeah. All right? So these are things that we can, that are traditionally offered foods during Qingming. And of course you have the dumplings, the dumplings and the buns, right? Yes, no, yes? Okay, I'm gonna go over 3 methods with you, 3 Buddhist methods that we can use to remember the kindness of the deceased and what we can do. The first method that we remember the deceased and benefit them at the same time is by doing pujas. So I think everybody here knows what a puja is. It's a specific set of rituals and prayers for a specific purpose. Now, pujas overcome a specific puja used to overcome a specific problem or create a specific condition for us or for our loved ones who have passed away. For example, for us, if we are traveling, for example, we might do the traveling prayer or a Dharma protector puja to remove any obstacles that we have to make our travel successful and without any obstacles. This is actually the same for the deceased. When we engage in a puja, they actually get the same benefits as we would because we dedicate the merits that were generated to them. Now, when we engage in a puja, what we need to remember is karma, which is actually the root cause of our situation. It's the root cause of our problems in life. It's the root cause of the good things in life. Similarly, when we pass away, we take rebirth, and we are once again under the influence of karma, your good karma and your negative karma. So when we engage in a puja for the deceased, we're actually remembering their kindness. Why? We're doing something beneficial for them. Okay? So pujas work in 2 ways. The first one is the purification of negative karma, and then the second is the accumulation of merit. Now, since karma is the cause of all our problems, if we purify our karma, we get rid of the problem. The cause for the problem to occur is completely removed. In the case of those who are deceased, who have passed on to their next life, if they are suffering, they suffer because of their karma. So if we engage in pujas for them, we help them purify their negative karma, which improves their situation. Okay? The second way is the accumulation of merit.
The assumption is that they have not gone to the next rebirth, or if they were reborn and then if we do the pujas, will they get or will their karma be purified in the next life?
Okay. Yes, basically it will be purified. So for example, when someone passes away, we automatically do pujas for their good rebirth, right? It's a thing that all Buddhists do. As soon as someone passes away, you pray for their good rebirth. Even after they've taken rebirth and you do a puja for them, you actually help them in that rebirth. So for example, one puja, the main puja that I'm going to focus on is Medicine Buddha Puja. One of the benefits of Medicine Buddha Puja, it is said, is that if somebody has taken rebirth in a difficult life in one of the 3 lower realms, if you do Medicine Buddha Puja correctly, with enough faith, with enough motivation, and invoke the blessings of Medicine Buddha, it actually causes them to pass away in that rebirth and take a good rebirth immediately. So yes, pujas do have an effect anywhere in samsara, anywhere in the 6 realms that we could take rebirth in. Yeah. So it does help, even if they have taken rebirth already.
Even if they have taken multiple rebirths?
Even if they've taken multiple rebirths. This is due to the power of, it is not due to us doing anything, it's actually due to the power of the Buddhas themselves, which I will touch a little bit on a little bit later. Okay? Okay. So the second way that pujas help is the accumulation of merit. Now, merit is an energy that does not get exhausted, so like karma does. So you have a certain amount of negative karma and you will have a certain amount of positive karma. Once you've used it up, that's it. Merit, however, does not get used up. Now, the specific energy of merit is that it creates the causes to override karma, in a sense. So for example, taking Medicine Buddha Puja again, if somebody is ill, we do a Medicine Buddha Puja. It has twofold effect. One is the purification of the negative karma causing that illness. The second is the generation of merit. So it has a twofold effect to overcome that particular situation. Okay? So there are many pujas that we can do for different purposes. And the pujas, if, for example, in Kachara, if someone has passed away, there's 3 pujas recommended to do for that person for them to take a good rebirth. That is a protective puja, Dorje Shugdan puja, to remove any obstacles in taking good rebirth. Lama Chopa, Guru Puja, to generate extreme amount of merits, and Medicine Buddha Puja. Now, what I'm going to concentrate on is Medicine Buddha Puja. Now, when we think about Medicine Buddha, we only think about one Buddha who is blue in color, right? Actually, when you do the puja, there's actually 8. You call upon the powers of 8 Buddhas, which is Medicine Buddha and his 6 brothers, 7 brothers in total, plus the 8th Buddha, who is Buddha Shakyamuni. Now, Medicine Buddha is known for healing, for overcoming illness. We all know that if we're ill or have any health problems, we sponsor a Medicine Buddha Puja or ourselves engage in the puja to help the person or help ourselves get through the health problem, the health situation. This is actually one very, very small part of what Medicine Buddha can do for you. Each of the Medicine Buddhas made vows in their previous lives. And when they're enlightened, what happens is that they manifest it in a way that they can fulfill these vows. So when we engage in the puja, we tap into the energy, their energy, specifically their energy of upholding the vows that they took. Now, Medicine Buddha is known for healing, obviously. Does anybody know any other benefits of Medicine Buddha puja? Or the Medicine Buddhas? Yeah, the answer was natural disasters, which is true. Medicine Buddha puja actually, it calms the environment and calms the land. One of the vows one of the Medicine Buddhas took is to alleviate suffering caused by natural disasters. So when you do a Medicine Buddha puja, it creates the energy in that area not to have any natural disasters. And in fact, one of the practices that is still prevalent is having an extremely large Medicine Buddha statue, which calms the land and protects the environment and everything there from natural disasters. There's actually quite a few. Did you know that Medicine Buddha can provide protection from spirits? No? Yeah or yes? Medicine Buddha is extremely beneficial for providing protection from spirits. Well, one of the reasons that we do it when a person has passed away is because it has specific benefits for our next life, for all of our future lives. One of these is to always be born as a human. Now, you might ask why we always want to be born as a human. I think we all know, I think everybody here would know that the three lower realms, suffering, hungry ghost, animal, and the hell realms. In these realms, you're always going to suffer. So the Medicine Buddha saves us from going to those lower realms. And the reason that we want to be born human from the three higher realms is because in the highest realm, all you're doing is enjoying yourself. You basically use up all your good karma. And in the demigod realm, you're completely overtaken by jealousy. So the best realm to be born in to practice the Dharma is as a human. So when we engage in the Medicine Buddha puja for somebody who has passed away, for the deceased, for our ancestors, we actually create the causes for them to be born again as a human in the next life. But more than that, the Medicine Buddha pujas have other benefits as well. For example, always being near your guru, always being near the Dharma, not being imprisoned, not being beaten, not falling to the lower realms. So when we engage in these pujas, what are we doing? You're creating the causes for the deceased to have a good life wherever they are now and in their future lives. So there's one very good way to remember their kindness. The second way to remember their kindness that I'm going to cover is to follow the instructions of your guru. And there's a reason for this, and it is exactly the same as a puja. Because what are you doing? You're purifying your negative karma and you're accumulating merit. Okay? Now, pujas are something that you engage in short term. It can last for a couple of hours. Then it generates a certain amount of merit, and that's it. When you follow your guru's instructions over a long period of time, you have the exact same benefits, but over a longer period of time. So, when you do this and you dedicate the merits to the deceased, this creates the causes for them to not suffer wherever they are and to have the good conditions that they need. Okay? Everybody clear with those two pujas and following your guru's instructions? Okay. Now, I am going to ask you all, it's a bit of audience participation. I want you to close your eyes quickly And think of someone that has passed away that you were close to. Think of how they impacted your life in a good way. Okay? Now, I want you to concentrate on one specific quality, a good quality that they had. Okay? If you can't think of anything, just take a deep breath and it will come to you. All of us here have had someone that has passed away who has impacted us in some way or another. Okay? Now I want you to think of a sentence that summarizes their qualities. This person was an extremely kind person. Okay? Everybody got a specific quality of a person that they knew? Okay, open your eyes. Now, I'm going to ask some of you, we don't need the name of the person, but I just want you to say that particular sentence that embodies the good quality that they had. We'll start with Pastor Hani.
Okay, she was in her lifetime always very, very generous, even to strangers.
Okay. Pastor Taming?
Unconditional love and caring throughout.
Okay. William?
She is loving and caring.
Okay. Alice?
She's loving and caring also. Thanks.
Cindy?
She was attentive and trustworthy.
Okay. All right. So we all know the sorts of qualities that we remember a person by. So when you think of this specific person and you have this specific quality that you remember them by, the best way to honor the memory of that person is what? It's by having this particular quality yourself. That is how you really remember the deceased in our lives. I'm not talking about, I covered already how we can benefit them. Now I'm going to talk about how you use their example, you remember what they did in their life, and how you can transform your own life by remembering their good qualities. Okay? So we heard that somebody was extremely generous, no matter who they gave to, no matter who the person was. Now, this is obviously a good quality, right? We remember this person because they are generous. So we need to bring that energy of generosity into our own lives. And make sure that we are someone that people remember. To make sure that we are someone that inspires people to live a good life, to live in harmony with others, to do good things. Another thing was unconditional love. Okay? Now, if we sit back and analyze our lives, when was the last instance of you being generous? Some of us here are more generous than others. How did you show your unconditional love to somebody today? These are the questions we actually need to ask ourselves on a daily basis. Not just on one particular day of the year. Because when we relegate remembering the deceased, remembering their kindness to just one day of the year, it is not going to make an impact. It's not going to make a transformation in our lives. What we need to do is we need to remember the good qualities people had always and use that to transform our lives. Is one of the best ways to remember that person, is to embody the qualities that they had, the good qualities that they had. Okay? So basically, we've seen unconditional love, we've seen generosity. These are all qualities we have that people have when they live a good life, when they're living a good life. Okay? So you might ask, that's kind of vague, right? Oh, they were a generous person. They lived a good life. What is a good life? When you remember them, how do you live a good life? What is the best way to repay their kindness to you? And actually, the answer is fundamental to Buddhism. It is the very core of Buddhist practice to transform your life into something better. And I know a lot of Buddhists think about transforming their lives. They talk about generosity, about unconditional love. Okay? But before you reach that point, in a sense, you need to be able to control how you are living already. Okay? I'm going to get up. How do you control your life? How do you make your life better? This is actually the most fundamental practice within Buddhism. How many of you here have taken refuge, formally taken refuge? Okay. How many of you here haven't formally taken refuge, but consider yourself to be Buddhist? Okay? What is the core practice of a Buddhist, apart from taking refuge in the three jewels? Okay, it's a bit more simpler than that. When you take refuge, how many vows do you take? 10. Who can name, apart from the pastors, who can name me all 10 vows? Okay.
No killing, no lying, no stealing.
Okay,
no,
maybe no Lamrim teachers. No pastors and nobody who teaches the Lamrim.
No sexual misconduct.
Okay.
What else? No idle chatter.
Yep.
Right. No divisive speech.
Yep.
What?
No wrong view,
Yeah.
malice,
Yes.
and cowardice.
Covetousness. Yeah. Jealousy.
Yeah,
All right. Okay.
finish.
These 10 are the fundamental ways that you transform your life. Now, for those of us who have taken refuge or consider ourselves to be Buddhist, this is actually the best way to remember the deceased. Why? The deceased have given us something. They've given us unconditional love. They've been generous towards us. They provided for us physically as we were growing up. How you remember them is leading a good life. And these 10 vows that you take to avoid these 10 non-virtues, we call them, is how you do it. You remember them day by day to transform your life. You take what good things they have given you and you use it. And if they were not very nice people, you can learn from their example. You learn from their example, you know how not to behave, what not to do. In that way, they're still kind to you because they've shown you how not to behave. So the 10 non-virtues, they're divided into 3 parts. Okay? The first part is to do with the body, the second, the speech, and the third, the mind. So the actions that we do is these 3 things. So the first 3, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, are all done with the body. Okay? So the first one is killing. Now, we all know from a secular point of view, if you kill somebody, you're going to get in legal trouble, you're going to end up in jail. All right? From a spiritual perspective, if you kill somebody, you've taken their life, you accumulate the negative karma of having killed, which in simple karmic terms means you will be killed in your next life, or you will have a consequence similar to being killed. But this doesn't just apply to humans. It also applies to animals and all other beings within samsara. Why is that? Because we're all in the samsara. We're all within the 6 realms. We ourselves have been animals in previous lives. And if we're not careful and don't live a good life, live a virtuous life, we are going to be reborn as an animal again. So if we kill animals in this life, we kill humans in this life, we create the causes for that to happen to us again. Okay? So in order to avoid that, you take the vow of not killing. And these vows, when you hear the word vow, you automatically have a semi-negative connotation in your head because you think it's denying you something. These vows are not actually denying you anything. Just think of these 3 things. Just these 3 things, not the entire 10, just these 3. Killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Forget about the word vow. Okay? How many of us in this room would think these 3 actions are okay? Nobody. We wouldn't go around trying to do these things. I mean, yes, there are people out there that do. But we have a firmer understanding of what is right and wrong, so we wouldn't actually go out and do these. Right? So in that sense, what does it harm you to have that vow or have that motivation not to kill? It doesn't harm you. But what it does is when you remember your vow, is it reinforces the idea in your mind stream not to kill. So every day that you hold that vow of not killing, and you consciously engage in making sure that anything you do does not kill, does not harm, it goes deeper and deeper into your mind stream. When it goes deeper and deeper into your mind stream, it crosses over into your next life. So automatically in your next life, you have the instinct not to kill. Okay? The second of the 10 non-virtues is stealing. Now, somebody has worked hard to get a particular item, and you come along and steal it. Again, this all has to do with karma. You're creating the causes for this to happen. We all know that when we have something precious and when we lose it, because we are still attached, we're going to be hurt, we're going to be in pain. Okay? So if we don't want that for ourselves, then we don't do it. Because remember, everything is based on karma. It is the same with sexual misconduct as well. Not forcing yourself onto somebody else. Because you have the causes for other people. That creates the causes for other people to force themselves on you. Okay? Just thinking about people in your life that have passed away. Maybe they were older. I'm sure they have told you not to kill. Right? I'm sure they told you not to steal. Stealing is wrong. Okay? And committing sexual misconduct is wrong. Right? So it's twofold. You remember them telling you not to do this. You remember how they tried to bring you up, the values that they instilled in you, and at the same time, these are Buddhist values anyway. Actually, it's more than Buddhist values. These are universal values. Somebody had asked me the other day, what is the point of holding the 10 refuge vows, of not committing these 10 non-virtues? And the answer is enlightenment. It's as simple as that. These vows form the basis of any other vows that you will take in the future. All other vows, whether they are pastor's vows, lay vows, sangha vows, tantric vows, bodhisattva vows, they are all actually extensions of these 10. So if you cannot hold these 10 or do not have a conscious intent to hold these 10, then most probably you will not be able to hold any further vows in the future. So it would be good for you to remind yourself of these 10, especially if you've taken refuge, continuously remind yourself of this. It's like the practice of positive affirmation. When people wake up in the morning, they look at themselves in the mirror and they make a positive affirmation every day to get themselves motivated for that day, to have an inner transformation happen for that particular day. You can do that the same with your refuge vows until you actually live by them. Because it's short. It's just 10 words. And what you do when you repeat this over and over in the day, or you remember them, it becomes automatic. You get bitten by a mosquito, you go to slap it away. But you have the tendency to remember, do not kill. So you won't slap it. It's as simple as that. It creates an extremely powerful transformation in your lives when you repeat something like this again and again. That's why something like positive affirmation actually works. Okay? So that's the 3 of the body done. Now 4 of the speech. We didn't actually get the full 4 earlier. Okay? First one is divisive speech. Idle chatter, gossip, and lying. Okay? Divisive speech. Who here doesn't want to be in a good relationship with a friend? Who here doesn't want to be in a good relationship with a parent, a brother, a sister, a partner? We all crave, as human beings, to be in good relationships with people. What you do when you use divisive language is you break people apart. When you break people apart, you create the causes for that to happen to yourself again. Okay? So you just don't engage in divisive speech. You may have a selfish motivation of engaging in that for a particular reason. But you need to stop yourself. You need to analyze your mind and say, no, I'm not going to say that. I know they're friends, and I want to come in between them, maybe because I want to be friends with this person, but he's or she is closer friends with another person. I want to be closer friends with them. So I'm going to talk bad about a person and cause their friendship to divide. This creates the exact same cause for that to happen to you. Okay? Then you have idle chatter. Speaking for the sake of speaking. is basically what idle chatter is. For no apparent reason, you just want to speak. You speak about everything under the sun, and this actually is very easy, this and gossip, the two of them, it very easily leads to lying. Why is that? Because there is no purpose behind the speaking. That's why when you see Buddhists, especially ordained members of the Sangha, they're very controlled in their speech because they have been training themselves not to engage in idle chatter and gossip because they know that it can easily lead to lying. Okay? Again, as with all the 10 non-virtues, this is the last time I'm going to say it, it creates the same causes for that to happen to you. So we all know when somebody lies about us, we feel bad because it's about our character, it's about our person, and it can also land us in some sort of trouble. Okay? And then the three 10 virtues of the mind. Okay? Hatred, jealousy, and wrong view. Hatred or anger. This is a very important one to make sure that you try to overcome. When you have a lot of anger towards somebody, you're most likely to forget everything else. When you get angry, there's a saying, when you get angry, you see red. Why do you see red? Because the person who you are angry against becomes the sole focus of your existence for that particular moment. All of your hatred is focused on one particular person, and you do things out of hatred. You don't think about anything else. We all know in Buddhism that we talk about mindfulness. Hatred and anger is the exact opposite to being mindful. Why? Because when you're angry, when you're hateful, you're not mindful of anything. You concentrate on one particular person, on one particular thing, and your whole existence in that moment is directed to that person, that situation, of getting that person back. You're not mindful of anything. When you are not mindful when you're angry, it's easier to engage in one of the other non-virtues. For example, I'm sure we all know examples of something that we've read on TV, something that we've read in the newspaper or watched on TV, that someone got extremely angry and they killed another person. So the anger and the hatred led to killing. Anger and hatred can easily lead to lying. So even though these may seem different, distinct, each of the 10 non-virtues, they're actually linked quite a lot. Then you have jealousy, being jealous of somebody, or being... Why would you be jealous of somebody? And the answer is, because you're attached. Now, some people are jealous of people just for the sake... I know some people who are jealous just because they like being jealous of other people. And then you have jealousy that arises because they have something that you want. The word used by Alice earlier was covetousness. It is jealousy, is wanting something that somebody else has. We need to learn to be content in what we have. How many people here had someone in their lives that have passed away that told them, be happy with what you have? Did you ever hear that? Yeah? Yes. Okay. So here you're dealing with one of the three primary poisons within Buddhism, which is attachment, which is desire, which is wanting things. Okay? And when you train yourself not to be jealous, you're countering your attachment, you're countering your desire, you're countering one of the 3 roots that keep you within samsara. The 10th non-virtue is, anybody? Wrong view. Now, wrong view itself is a very big topic, but here I'm going to keep it simple. Wrong view is thinking that if you engage in all of the 10 non-virtues, you're living a good life. Okay? Wrong view is thinking that karma does not exist. These are all wrong views, basically. Not keeping wrong views. Wrong view is thinking that the Buddhas do not have the power to transform our lives. That the teachings do not have power to transform our lives. That being a good person does not have the power to transform our lives. Okay? So when you remember the deceased, whether it's on Qingming, whether it's throughout the year, you can concentrate on their good qualities and you can concentrate on their bad qualities. But they were still kind. You may have emotions, everybody's going to have emotions mixed up with how they remember somebody. You either remember someone in a positive light or you remember someone in a negative light. Right? But in either instance, they have been kind. They have been kind because they have shown you how to live or how not to live. So that is how to remember the kindness of the deceased in your life, to create an actual transformation in your life. Okay? That was what I wanted to share with you all. I haven't used up all the time at all, but any questions about pujas, about the 10 non-virtues?
I mean, we talk positive. We always say, what do they tell us? How do we live our life virtuously? But there are many people who have died. Actually, the way they live their life is something you do not want to do. So therefore, I was glad that you actually think some will tell you what to do, some will tell you what not to do. I think that is actually the truth of all the people who have died. Some of them actually teach you better what not to do, because the results of their life when they die will tell you don't do it.
This is actually one of the things that I wanted to stress today. Because when people talk about the deceased or remembering the deceased, remembering their kindness, remembering ways to overcome or to transform our lives, they always tend to focus on the good side. They always tend to focus on the rainbows and the sunshine. But the matter of the fact is that we're in samsara. They were people, we are people. We have negative qualities, we have positive qualities. They also had negative qualities and positive qualities. They may have acted like monsters in their lives. Now, sadly, unfortunately, they are gone. They didn't have the chance to transform in that particular life. If they led a bad life, most probably they're suffering somewhere. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to think about what they did to create a transformation in our lives. So we need to remember the good points and the bad points, why we're stuck in samsara. We're not out. It reminds me of something that Sam Rinpoche said a couple of weeks ago. Anything you do in samsara will always create some form of negative karma. Why? because we're in samsara. Even if you do even if you do something virtuous, your intent is good. You do something virtuous, there is a it's somewhere along the line, you will generate a teeny weeny bit of bad karma. Because when you do an action, which is what the word karma means, due to the nature of samsara, it is going to have good qualities and bad qualities at the same time. It's just that either the good karma for that particular action is more or less, or the negative karma is more or less. This is what the Buddha taught in the Four Noble Truths. Samsara is suffering. Suffering is karma. You can't get away from it. If we're in samsara, you're going to be doing good things and bad things at the same time. It is not just black and white. It's not just good. It is not just bad. It's to varying degrees. Yes. It's the judgmental attitude of our mind, and it's our intention behind it. In fact, for those of you who have attended Lamrim, for the pastors and the Lamrim teachers who would know, to create what's known as a complete karma, there is 4 aspects that all need to be there for a full karma. But even if you do one of those, it still creates karma. What I was talking about earlier about pujas, twofold: the purification of negative karma and accumulation of merit. Okay, a purification of negative karma is extremely important, as we all know. Okay. In fact, it is one of the prerequisites to gaining a tantric practice, for example. For example, prostrations. When you do prostrations, you are purifying the negative karma of what? The body. Anybody else know what else? The ego. Because you're literally prostrating. You're using your body, you're prostrating to something. You put your ego down. People who have done a lot of prostrations properly with the correct motivation, you will notice that the ego will be less. Because that has purified not only the karma of the body, of ailments, of health issues, but ego as well. So you will see that they're actually more humble people. Now, what we usually recite when we do it is we usually recite refuge. There is actually a mantra that is specifically for prostration. You can do any mantra you like when you're prostrating, but you need to incorporate your body, speech, and mind to get the full effect of it. Actually, in anything in Buddhism, you need to include these 3: your body, your speech, and your mind. That's why the 10 on virtues covers the body, the speech, and the mind, because it acts on these 3 things. So even when you sit down in your daily sadhana, for example, you need to engage your body, your speech, and your mind. If you don't engage your body, your speech, and your mind, you haven't made the full use of doing your sadhana. So how to engage your body? You sit still. If you sit on a chair, you sit still. If you sit on the floor, you sit in cross-legged. You're engaging your body because you're there in one place, you're controlling your body. You engage your speech. We all know that when we recite our sadhana, we need to recite it out aloud. So you're engaging your speech. And the third thing is you engage your mind, specifically when you're doing the visualizations. At the beginning, when you take refuge, you take a good motivation every day, and then throughout your sadhana, it is the visualization. When you have these 3 things in play, when you're doing your sadhana, when you're doing your puja, when you're doing any dharma work, anything that you want to be virtuous in your life, you're practicing the dharma. You're purifying your negative karma when you do that. And you accumulate merit at the same time.
So therefore, until you're enlightened or you're so virtuous in your practice, there is no way your karma can be eliminated, isn't it?
Correct. You will always have...
Keep on asking for purification. You keep on doing purification, accumulate merits, and still accumulate negative karma.
Yeah.
Until enlightened.
Yeah. But...
That's why I tell you I'm a Buddhist. It's a tough job.
But the thing is, when it comes to karma, the way I explained it is black and white. Karma is extremely fluid. Is extremely fluid. Just think about one day in your life. You wake up in the morning, by the time you go to sleep, how many things have happened during that day? You've had how many ups and downs, you've met how many challenges, situations have gone how smoothly during that period. That's all due to karma. And that karma can be that fluid that one day, just one day in your life can have so many ups and downs. It shows you how fluid karma can be.
Fluid or not fluid is the accumulation of new karma that is the problem.
Yes.
You see, you can talk about up and down daily. In the up and down, are you purifying more or are you accumulating more? Chances are accumulating more.
Correct.
But you hope to accumulate small ones. So that night you do your sadhana, you purify, all right?
But more than that, it's more than just accumulating your negative karma. One thing people forget is your karma multiplies. Multiplies.
Yes, yes.
So the negative karma that you have is always multiplying. Similarly, actually the positive karma also multiplies. It also multiplies. All karma will multiply over time. The nature of samsara is that even though the good karma multiplies, your bad karma multiplies, the nature of samsara is that your negative karma will open up quicker than your positive karma, which is the reason why purification practices are so important. As you progress higher and higher in the spiritual path, the karma that you deal with, that you need to purify, becomes subtler and subtler. For example, on our level, we need to purify the karma of being in a car accident. We need to purify the karma of being ill. As you progress further and further up, you need to purify the karma of having an ego. You need to purify the karma of being an angry person. You need to purify the karma of having wrong views. It gets subtler and subtler until you get to the last stage, which is the I. Now, just before you reach enlightenment, you still have an extremely subtle form of karma. The karma is still there until the verge of enlightenment. And when you hit the verge of enlightenment, when you reach enlightenment, all karma is negated. You are no longer bound by karma. So it's not something that is a beginner level thing. It's something that is practiced throughout the entire path to enlightenment. Okay, so the question was, if somebody doesn't believe in karma or doesn't know about karma and blames it on bad luck, how do they purify that? Okay? In the strictest sense of the word, they wouldn't be able to purify it. But they will be able to do things that would negate the situation, but will make the situation better. Can you think of an example of something they could do? Can you think an example of something they could do? So if they're going through severe financial difficulties, say, what can they do? Declare bankruptcy. But if you know them, how would you advise them? Yeah. Okay, you can help them. How? It's correct. You can dedicate your merits that you generate from your practice to them.
But what if that person doesn't know anyone Buddhist or say don't know me or
If they don't believe, they don't actually, you can't really do anything for them in that sense. You can explain karma to them, you can do pujas for them, you can ask them, you can advise the person to be a better person. Follow the 10 non-virtues, abandoning the 10 non-virtues. When you're going through financial difficulties, we all know, okay, I'm just going to take the financial difficulties angle. We all know that you can do two things. So if you know someone who, you can do two things. You know somebody who's going through financial difficulties. You can do pujas for them, you can pray for them, you can dedicate the merits to them to overcome their difficulties. For example, you can do Gyanze practice or Zambala practice, any wealth deity practice. Okay? The second thing is you dedicate your merits of your practice, your daily practice to them, or you explain to them or try to get them to do something that generates good karma or good merit. For example, financial difficulties come about because you have the energy of miserliness, of stinginess. So the antidote to that is what? Generosity.
I have met many people who says, I don't believe in karma. Then I kind of explain to them, what is the meaning of cause? What is the meaning of effects? And you ask them in life, how often good things happen to them and they ask them they don't deserve it, or bad things, they don't deserve it. Then you kind of make them understand cause and effect. Because when you say karma, it becomes very religious. They kind of shut you off. So you talk about cause and effects, or consequences of your action, results of your action.
That is a good idea, but you do get instances in which somebody has done something all they can to get a specific cause, but due to their karma, it doesn't turn out that way. So it is good to do that. But the thing is, the Buddhist path depends on an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And the first of the Noble Truth is that there is suffering. You can do a puja for somebody. You can dedicate your merits for somebody, but it's not going to, and it works because you create merit, but it's not going to be as effective if they do it themselves. Okay? Okay, this brings me to a point that I forgot to mention. When you do a puja for somebody, how much of the merits goes to the deceased? How many? 30.
If I'm not wrong, I read from an article, but not in a Shen Rinpoche blog.
Actually, Rinpoche mentioned it a couple of weeks back. If I do a puja for somebody and I don't know them whatsoever, right? But somebody asked me to do a puja for them. I do a puja for them, this person has passed away. The merits that they collect is, say, maybe roughly 25%. Roughly 25%, roughly. The Rinpoche mentioned, it's not a specific figure, it is just a generalization. However, if my relative passes away, if my mother or my father passes away and I do a puja for them, the merits that they get is around 50%. Okay? The other percent goes to who? Yourself. Okay? The reason why the amount of merit is more for a person that you're related to is because you have an extremely strong karmic connection with that person. You had the karma to have that person in your life, and in this life, you created karma with them. So that link is still there, and the link is new in that sense. So you're able to generate more merits for your loved ones, for your ancestors, for the deceased, when you pray for them yourselves. Okay? That is one of the reasons that sometimes when somebody passes away, it is advised that there is a series of pujas done for a person, because it depends on that person's particular karma. Okay? To get what result that you want. You want them to have a good rebirth. So maybe usually you only do one medicine Buddha puja, but you're advised to by an enlightened being like Rinpoche, or through divination, or maybe even through an oracle, that do 10 instead. Because you need to build up that merit for them to get the desired result, which is the good rebirth. There's a reason that you pray for world peace. Actually, this is going to sound very bad, we're in samsara. We're in samsara. And in that sense, world peace will never be achieved. Two, the idea that we have in our heads of what world peace should be. World peace can be achieved in that there's a level of peace throughout the world, but not to the extent that we have the idea in our head. Saying that, we still need to pray for world peace. The reason that we need to pray for world peace is because of the motivation. We all know that when bodhicitta is the motivation to benefit all sentient beings. We can't achieve enlightenment until we have the wish to benefit everyone. That is why we keep praying for world peace. When you dedicate for all sentient beings, the actual act of dedicating the merit that you've generated for all sentient beings creates more merit that comes back to you. In this particular case, for your friends, there can be a couple of reasons. One is that even though this person is engaging in the prayers, they're not engaging their body, speech, and their mind. It's just the speech. Merits are generated, but more merits will be generated if you engage all three. The second is the motivation behind the prayers. Okay? Why does this person do the prayers every day? Again, even if the person does it for themselves, right? There is still there needs to be a
even though that she's probably the motivation is not so pure. Of course, everyone do prayer because for herself, right? So, but somehow or other, she still collects some merits, but maybe not that big.
Yeah, it's correct. The person is still collecting merit. It may not be obvious to this person right now, but eventually it will be. Yeah. Yeah. But Pastor Hani mentioned that it might be because her prayers, her motivation is motivated by the 8 worldly concerns. But even in that case, even if it was, through the power of the Buddhas themselves, you would generate merit. So in this case, what seems to be happening is either this person is not generating enough merit for a change to occur in life, or the merits are accruing. It is just that the person's negative karma isn't allowing the merits to. The amount of merits hasn't overcome the negative karma the person is going through.
For it to have maximum benefit, you actually have to engage your body, speech, and mind. Now, on the other hand, you're also told that if you recite the mantras or the prayers in Tibetan, it carries more energy or power to that extent. Now, of course, the level of comprehension and actually appreciating the prayers would be more if you actually recite in English, right? So how do you then reconcile both?
Whatever language that you recite the prayers in will be effective. However you pronounce the mantra, it will be effective. There is a reason behind this. Actually, Rinpoche explained this the other day as well. The prayers were originally written in Sanskrit. They were in an Indian language. When they went over to Tibet and they were being translated, because the languages are so different, the pronunciation changed. If you're caught up on the pronunciation and how they're pronounced, the mantra in Tibetan, would it have any power?
I think the question is not so much of whether or not the effectiveness of the prayer, because either way, either language, it is effective. It's more of, like I said earlier on, when you said that you engage your body, speech, and mind, you're actually doing it, right? And if you really engage all three, which includes your comprehension, your understanding, and your level of appreciation of it is more, right? and you then recite in Tibetan. It's sort of like if you do it in English and you recite it, you resonate more with it as opposed to doing it in Tibetan, which you are encouraged to do. It has the slight lesser relation to it, I would say. So how do you reconcile that?
It's still going to be effective, but effective to a differing level. Okay? So if you recite in Tibetan, but you don't know what it is that you're reciting, it's still going to be effective because it's a prayer to the Buddhas. You still have the motivation to engage in the prayer. But you may not understand the meaning of it. You're still generating merit from doing that. But if you understand the meaning of it, say if you're reading in English, okay, it is the benefit would be more because you understand the meaning of it. And usually within the prayers, there's the visualization to follow that follows the words that you're reading. So obviously if you're reading it in English, you're able to follow the visualization as you're reading it. If you're reciting in the Tibetan, however, some people, even among the pastors, some people prefer to do their daily sadhana in English, some people prefer to do their daily sadhana in Tibetan. But if they do it in Tibetan, they've memorized the meaning, or they at least know the visualization of that particular verse or whatever. So it is more effective, definitely, when you know what you're reciting. But the blessings are still there, no matter what. Yeah.
Any more questions? Last one.
No?
If there's no further question, thank you very much to the very meaningful talk by Pastor Nero. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.